right. Welcome to the Broncos Zone podcast, part of the ESP family of podcasts by the fan, for the fans, and diehards only. Guys, what a week or weekend, I should say. I know we were all kind of stuck to our phones on text threads and glued to the TV or whatever device we had that we were able to watch the draft on. But man, what a weekend! The Broncos, I think, came away smelling nicely after the draft. I think from what I've seen, and we'll certainly dive into it a little bit more in detail. But from what I've seen, I think for the most part, the grades seem pretty good. On the draft picks, especially when you factor in if you count Waddle kind of as that first round pick, which I do. That's clearly an A plus in my book when it comes to Waddle. You're not going to find anybody else in the first round that's going to give you at that late of a pick, anyways. That's going to give you that type of value, but. As you guys see, we've got four of us here tonight. We've got Vince, Coach Cobb, and Braden. Our trusty leader, Zach, is away on work today, so hopefully he's listening in, and I know he'll be back I think in 2 weeks, and he will join us again then. But let's jump into it, guys. What's your immediate take on the draft, how things went, and what are you guys feeling?
Feeling pretty good. It wasn't such a flashy draft. I know we were all expecting, maybe Eli Stowers or a Max Clare until the Rams and Eagles swooped in from under us. But, I think we got the positions of need and maybe potentially found some hidden gems in later rounds.
Yeah, I'd agree on that. One of the things hot take that I took was a couple of things I'd seen that Mel Kiper did not agree with the Broncos, and I figured, to be honest with you, as Mel once, somebody said, "Who the hell is Mel Kiper?" I think that the Broncos came away with some good stuff, and I think we've got some good framework with which to build. And there's a couple guys I know, Mr. Relevant. Gotta love that. The Broncos got stuck. Everybody gets stuck with them. And holy cow, what we came away with in Mr. Relevant, I think we might have as much as I hate to say it, get out there too far ahead, I think we might have a rookie of the year in the making, to be honest with you.
Coach Cobb with the bold prediction already.
Hey, gotta roll with it for sure.
Love it. Yeah, I'd say this draft to me, it's a coach and a GM who, in large part, feel really good about what they already have. They didn't feel the need to do anything dramatic. They've, are slowly getting back to a place where they're not where we've recovered from the Russell Wilson trade, both in cap space and draft capital that we've sent out, and they weren't looking to make any splashy moves where we're sending a bunch of other things out the door in order to move up. They certainly did some trading, which they especially seem to enjoy doing, but I mean, they picked up depth pretty much. None of these guys I would expect to be day one starters by any means, but we picked up a lot of pieces that were areas of need that will either fill in nicely in gaps this year or potentially can do so in the near future. And I mean, that's what you have to do with the later round picks, especially.
Yeah, for sure. And, ultimately, look, this team we've shown is not afraid to make a trade. We are not afraid to go out and, find somebody who's going to fill the holes and the needs that we may have. And ultimately, Vince, I think your analysis is kind of spot on. They didn't feel like they had a ton of holes. So what do you do when you're kind of faced with that at draft time? You start to, fill your depth. And I think ultimately what we did a really good job of in this draft is filling depth with guys that they can, as you said, maybe not a day one starter, but ultimately guys that they feel in a year to 2 years will get on the field and hopefully make an impact. Let's I guess we could just start right at the top. I was kind of bummed out. Braden, I know you had mentioned it. When a couple of picks right before us, we started to see some of the guys, the Anthony Hill Juniors and the Eli Stowers getting picked right in front of us. So that was kind of a bummer. But what do you guys feel, as far as the move we made, dropping from the second round to the third round? I know it wasn't a ton of spots. I think it was just 4 spots, but ultimately, give me your thoughts on that trade, what it did for us, and ultimately who we ended up getting out of it. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think it was a fine trade. I think we didn't, maybe George Payton and Sean Payton didn't really see anybody that they wanted in the second round, thought they could get a better value pick going on, grabbing Texas A&M defensive tackle. You'll have to help me out on the name. Tyler
Needham.
Tyler O'Needham. With John Franklin Myers out, definitely something that we needed in that defensive tackle position, considering we didn't make a move in free agency for that. I know I had predicted Cam Johnson or Jordan, and we went with the Texas A&M guy. He seems to be pretty solid, quick first step, great versatility, active hands. I think that the biggest knock on him is he's a bit undersized and he's not super great in pass rushing, but he does fill that gap, in stopping the run. So I think that's great for what we needed at the time.
Coach Cobb, what's your initial thoughts?
Looking at the trades, like I said, we went back, we moved back in a couple of spots. On the D tackle position, I agree. I think he's a plug and play. I think we're gonna take a look and see, what's he gonna bring? Is he gonna be? I think, kind of what Braden was going with is, I think he's just the guy that we're gonna have to plug in there and get his role, figure out his role for a bit, and see if he's somebody that develops us down the road. One of the trades that I want to go to was, we talked about the Eli Stowers, and we talked about a couple of the Sadiq, which we knew was pie in the sky. But to look at them jumping up and grabbing Jolie, I think was a really interesting pick, and somebody that you could tell after Payton and Payton made that jump, they weren't afraid to do it. And I think that Jolie has got some nice pieces that, as I sit there and look at more into his film and look at more of what he's bringing to us, I think it's entirely possible they may have found the Joker for the Broncos offense, to be honest with you. I think he checks a lot of boxes. And so I'm pretty excited for that one for sure.
Yeah, I'm somebody who was really sold on Hill coming into the draft. And so the fact that we got, who knows if they consider that a position of need within the second round, at a second round evaluation. I was really hoping for him. I think he's going to be incredible. And so the fact that he got taken just a few picks in front of us, that would have been amazing in my mind. But yeah, I'll never fault a team for moving back if they're not in love with somebody at their pick and getting some extra value. And you look at, they traded back and then they used all the picks. I like this draft class as a whole, specifically because of what we talked about. It's the most cost-effective way to build out your roster is through the draft. And they did that. And we needed to add depth, and that's what they did across the board. So it was not the most exciting Broncos draft we've ever been a part of, but I sincerely believe that it was an effective one for what Payton and Payton felt like needed to come in. And they're the ones in the driver's seat, so you kind of got to trust them. And there's been a lot of roster turnover from when Payton first took over to now, but the attitude that the Broncos have from back then to now, I think is drastically different, and we're in a much better place to compete. Obviously, making it to the AFC Championship, but I think that, you know, not very many gaps, and we plugged in a lot of depth, and we did it in a cost-effective way. It's hard to be mad at that.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, if we just go back to Onedum real quick, some of the notes that I have: strengths, elite leverage, heavy hands, outstanding at shedding blocks and maintaining gap integrity, high motor player. High motor player to me is ultimately that's kind of what you want to see in a defensive lineman. Somebody who's just going to be a dog up front. Braden, I think you nailed it. Limited pass rush. He's not a rush the passer kind of guy. At least he wasn't in college. But that's okay. I think, we have guys on the defense that get after the passer. And, look, not everybody comes into the league as a pass rusher. That can be a trait that you can pick up over time. And, especially on a team that gets after the quarterbacks, I think that's something that we can, potentially lean into or look forward to with him down the road. Jolly, the Jolly pick, or I think that was an interesting pick. Not that I'm not saying I didn't like it. I did like the fact that we went up and got a tight end, because I do think that that's certainly a position where we need to find that joker. The things that I've seen last year was almost kind of a down year for him compared to the previous year, which, look, in college, that's just the way it goes with the transfer portal, and teams ebb and flow, and you're not always going to, put up the same big numbers you did the year before. But he led all ACC tight ends in receptions. So he was the primary target for NC State. To say you led a conference in catches as a tight end, that's a big deal. So it's clearly a guy that, hopefully we can, bring forward and see what he's able to do, make some catches over the middle. I mean, ultimately, I think that's what we're looking for from that position. For me, my favorite pick that the Broncos made, we'll talk more about Red Murdoch. I think that one's maybe a podcast favorite, simply because our guy Zach, who's not here, absolutely called that pick. But Jonah Coleman, if I don't know, and Braden, I think you may have been onto him a few weeks before the draft, but I don't know that there's a better fit for what Sean Payton is trying to do stylistically. When you first saw the pick, he doesn't flash at you, right? Because he doesn't have that 4.4, 4.3 speed. But, the things I've read about him, he's a bowling ball. He's hard to tackle. What has been the one thing the Broncos just absolutely could not do over the past couple of years is if we needed to go get 1 yard to score a touchdown, we can't run the ball. We just could not do it. Well, maybe now we found a guy that can come in and get that yard when we need it. The other thing I loved about him in his kind of post-draft was really the first thing he mentioned was about pass protection and how you can't get on the field if you're not going to pass protect. That's got to be music to Bo Nix's ears, So I think he's spot on. I don't know, Braden, I'll let you kind of talk a little bit more since I think you kind of had him highlighted, but what's your thoughts on Coleman?
I love Jonah Coleman. It was, I graded him pretty much even with Jadarian Price, just kind of based on what stylistically you like. Jadarian Price, more of your ground and pound, and then Jonah Coleman, more of your balanced pass catching and rushing running back. I love him. He's not a turnover guy. We love that. The last time we had someone like that was Philip Lindsay, who is also somewhat of a smaller guy. But Jonah Coleman seems like he can be that, potentially maybe give him a year or two, that 20 down back. I know that's not the way Sean Payton likes to run his running backs, but I think the way that he's just built, he's thick, he has great hands, pass blocking. I could see him maybe if J.K. Dobbins leaves after this next year or the year after, he kind of fills that running back one position. I love his attitude. He's a football guy.
Yeah, I think he led the nation in rushing touchdowns, if I'm not mistaken, or maybe tied for
I
the
think
lead
it was
in rushing
15.
touchdowns. 15. Yeah, so nose for an end zone, for the end zone. And look, I mean, when your comparison is Maurice Jones-Drew,
Right.
and you're getting that guy, not as a first rounder, not as a second rounder, not even as a third rounder. Yeah, I'd take a Maurice Jones-Drew in the 4th round. So, yeah. Yeah.
100%.
Yep.
I was really in love with the running back from Arkansas, but when the first thing the guy says to the Broncos media is, "I look forward to protecting Bo," or whatever the quote was, like, hard not to like that. And I mean, going back to Maurice Jones-Drew, the comparison, do you all remember that clip of when he took out Sean Mary? What was the
Merriman?
outside linebacker?
Merriman.
Yeah, Merriman.
Yep.
On a blitz, and just like completely checked him in the chin strap and knocked him down. And like nobody did that to Sean Merriman at the time. And so, if that's the kind of pass blocking back we get, I mean, okay. And what did he do? Bench press. He did the bench press 22 times at the combine at 5'8". So I mean, like, yeah, that stands to reason as a bowling ball type back. I don't love that he didn't run the 40 at either the pro day or the combine. That makes me a little bit worried about like what his actual high end speed is. But like, if what you're saying, Eric, if he's going to be the guy that's going to go get it on 3rd and 1 or 4th and 1, we don't need him to, be the guy who we hand it to on pitches or toss it to on pitches or on stretch plays. Like, we've got RJ Harvey for that. And so, yeah, I like big physical running backs, and we kind of went the exact opposite of that. We might have the shortest running back room in all the NFL now, but I think there's talent in there. You can't deny that.
No. Yep, I agree. And, just going back through, they're talking about him being as a day 3 option who can compete for a job as a 3-down backup. I mean, that right off the bat says this is a guy, like everybody had talked about, if you need that yard, if you got to have that, we ran into that so many times this past year with the short down, short yardage type of situations that you just had to feel. Unless we came up with something completely creative, we weren't going to get it. And I think teams started to tee off on that a little bit, and we had to get a little more creative than we wanted with Bo and getting him out and running. That was one thing they talked about, although that's part of Bo's game. Let's get him out of having to do that. Let's get that guy that can just pound it right up the middle. Just go get us that 1-2 yards that we need. And they certainly see him with the bowling ball, like you said, but it's I think that's something we've got here with Jonah for sure.
And not to be overly worried about Bo injuries, since he's only had one injury in his 2-year career, but like, we relied a lot on quarterback sneaks to pick up those short yard situations. And I don't want to treat Bo Nix like Peyton Manning those last couple of years where we like refuse to do a quarterback sneak with him. But like, if he's our franchise guy, like, it would be nice to be able to hand it to a running back rather than shove our franchise quarterback headfirst into a bunch of very large people. So I like that too.
Yeah, but Payton did prove against the Cowboys. Payton did prove against the Cowboys. He could get out there when he needed to, didn't he?
That's true.
Yeah. Even a blind squirrel finds a nut every once in a while, right?
It's harsh.
Vince, one thing that you talked about is so I didn't like the fact that he didn't run the 40 either, but sometimes top end speed in the NFL is overrated. With a guy that you're wanting, I think you said it exactly right. With a guy that you're going to use as a hammer, I don't think that top end speed is really it's not critical for him. And I think, he's clearly fast enough. There's a difference between, regular speed and game speed. And clearly he ran it fast enough to score 15 touchdowns last season. We'll see what we get. Hopefully the future is bright for him though. As I think that's that's somebody who fits very well into what Sean Payton wants to do. Just kind of going down the list, we had 2 4th-round picks. So after Coleman, we looked to another Bronco, Cage Casey at Boise State. Look, that's when we talk about, this is not the sexiest type of draft. This is a guy who I think you're clearly getting to come in, and might not be this year. Maybe he does play some this year, but he is clearly a piece that they are going to want to use for the future. They're going to put him in probably, he's listed as a tackle, but I've read enough about him to where, they definitely feel like they could move him to guard. He has that versatility, and, the things that I read about him, nasty finisher, like those are the kinds of things you want to hear about an offensive lineman. So, I love that pick as another 4th-round pick. You're starting to look at how crafty the Broncos get in that draft room. It's not just a bunch of big name guys that they're going out there and picking. You build from within, and a lot of times, I know we've talked about it before, but it's not the guys that are picked in day 1 that win you the Super Bowl. The day 2 and day 3 guys that win you the Super Bowl. So I don't know. I'm interested to hear your guys' thoughts on a tackle. I mean, we didn't overpick for him. I don't think you're not reaching in the 4th round for a tackle, but what's your thoughts?
I think it's a perfect pick, especially, he's got a little bit smaller arms. Kind of reminds me a little bit of Will Campbell last year. Obviously, Will went in the 1st round, but I think just like with Will Campbell potentially moving him to offensive guard, I think Cage Casey is probably going to be in that position predominantly, unless, Bowles goes down. I just think he's a great anchor for that position. And with Ben Powers having, some injury issues, the past few years, it seems like a good pick, a safe pick, and could potentially be a reliable starter in the future.
Yeah, if I could jump in there, Braden, I love what you just said. I did a lot of reading on him because my initial reaction out of all the picks is I was most excited about this one, and so I was really curious about him. And I thought this quote out of the Athletic post-draft wrap-up for the Broncos was really telling. So Sean Payton has said they think of their offensive linemen as left-sided or right-sided linemen rather than guards or tackles. And the 6'5", 310-pound Casey will get his snaps at tackle during the offseason, but the Broncos will also want to see what he can do at left guard, where starter Ben Powers is entering the final year of his contract. If Casey can prove to be a replacement at that position by 2027, or at least an option to compete for the job, this pick will be a major hit. And I mean, like, I love good quality linemen, and Ben Powers is that. But if you want to extend your window, you have to find replacements without overpaying people. And if Cage Casey comes in and can be a viable option, and I'm not ever advocating for like just letting a guy walk. I want people to extend their careers to get their money, because football is a brutal sport. But as a Broncos fan, if we could cost effectively fill that gap with somebody who proves that they can handle the workload at that position, that's great. And plus, I like moving big athletic tackles inside if they are not like clear cut for the tackle position, and that seems exactly what Cage Casey is.
Sure. Yeah, my take on it is, I think we got to see a little bit of Frank Crum last year, who I think certainly became a fan favorite and obviously can catch the ball, which surprised everybody. They finally threw it to him as it goes. But the great thing with this pick is you've got another guy. Now Frank Crum gets ready to take that next step. So does Casey move into Frank's spot? We start using Cage more, and now we're really starting to build a framework of what these guys, they're transforming that offensive line a little bit more into some of the things that Davis Webb wants to do, some of the things that Sean wants to do, getting some more, getting some of that power that Casey certainly brings, but also being able to, as you said, use him as a guard, use him as a tackle, exactly they did with Frank Crum last year. And now I think you're really starting to build some really awesome depth along that line. And like you said, Vince, with Powers being in last year, yes, sir, this is building it's a good step in the right direction of the future for this offensive line.
Depth at offensive and defensive line is just such a key element to the NFL, because you can see what happens to teams. We all know that the Chiefs had just a dominant run for a decade. Yeah. What was the most dominant parts outside of Patrick Mahomes? We get it. He's elite on another level, but they dominated the offensive and defensive trenches. And that's, wasn't just because they had one or two guys on those lines that could do all the work. They had guys that they could rotate in and out. It didn't matter who was out there. They were all able to get the job done. And Garrett Bowles, I love Garrett Bowles, but he's not getting younger. So there's at some point, some of these guys are Ben Powers, these guys are going to have to get replaced at some point. We never want injuries to happen, but it is the NFL and injuries do happen. So you have to be ready. And I think it's really smart to, find these kinds of guys that you can rotate in. Coach, I'm going to let you talk. I know you talked a little bit about Justin Jolly. We're just kind of going down the list here in order, but clearly tight end was a position that I think, whether it's, us as fans, the media, everybody kind of had highlighted tight end as a need position for the Broncos coming into the draft. So, give me your thoughts on Jolly and, what you've seen so far.
I think that he just gives us a little bit of a different element. When we sit there and talk about, in our very first podcast we talked about those guys wanting to run it back. Felt really good about our team and what's going on. The Joker for Sean Payton's offense, he's talked about it so much. We have 4 tight ends I can think of right off the bat. Evan Ingram last year, we all were super excited about, and this is going to be the guy we finally need. And we're still waiting on Evan. Then we signed the other 3 tight ends that I don't think anybody gets too excited about threatening the defense. They're extra blockers. They're extra things that'll happen. They'll catch a pass every once in a while. Now we've got Jolly, and sitting there looking at some of his film, seeing him, there are certain things that he still needs to polish. I don't think they're looking for him to come right in and take the job day one. Again, we talked about that with the number of our picks and where they are in second day picks. But I think this is a guy that they can move around, and they can finally start to take some time to develop him. And if he's the one that we can look at with a Joker that can just add to that offense, I think we're in good shape. And they're using him as the F, so they can use him in a variety of different ways. He's a little bit undersized from where they would hope necessarily a guy is, but I'll be honest with you, I'm still waiting on the guy that we drafted from, I think it was BYU last year, that, is a 6'8" guy. If that ever comes through, then, we're good. But I do like this guy. I think he's got a lot to learn. But again, it's somebody that we don't need right away, and hopefully we'll light a fire under Evan Ingram a little bit to get out there and do some things that we expected Evan was going to bring to the team.
Absolutely. I kind of watched the tape on him, and it's no secret I was high on Eli Stowers. I think Jolie brings a lot of the same stuff that Stowers is going to bring to the Eagles. I kind of have him comped around an Evan Ingram, maybe a Jonnu Smith type athleticism with a Dallas Goedert potential for being a possession tight end receiving kind of a guy. Just looking at him in open field, it just seems like a dream for Sean Payton, the way that he can make defenders miss. we don't need blockers. We have a ton of blocking tight ends. So if we can have our own version of a Travis Kelce or someone who can just have a mismatch on a corner size wise or a mismatch on a linebacker speed wise, I think that just brings us so much to the table, especially since he's much younger than Evan Ingram. I think that fits very well with us.
Yeah. If I could just mention a few things about that, I love what both of you said. Some of the things that stuck out to me is he had just a 2% drop rate in 2025. We all know how we feel about the drops from this past season. And he's known for working himself open in scramble situations. And boy, do we have a quarterback that likes to get out of the pocket. So, I mean, like those two things alone, I love that in a tight end. So, I mean, he was rated on a lot of boards as someone who should go in the 3rd or 4th round. So just purely on the value, I love it when you sort of outsmart everybody else and you fill a position of need 2 rounds later with a guy that should have gotten 2 rounds earlier. But that doesn't mean anything. We'll see what his production is, but he seems like he would be a good fit for what the Broncos need.
Yeah, solid hands guy. I love what you said about the scramble drill, because Bo Nix is a guy who's going to scramble around, a guy that can find an open space, especially from a tight end position, that can catch the ball as well. Check mark, check mark, check mark. In my opinion, that's exactly what we're looking for. The next guy on the list was our first 7th round pick. We did talk about safety. This was Miles Scott out of Illinois. I don't know a whole lot about him. I'll be really honest with you, except for what I've read. High football IQ, leadership was something that was mentioned with him. I know he transitioned from a wide receiver, so he's still kind of finding his way as a safety. That worries me a little bit. Typically, what do they like to call defensive backs? They're just wide receivers that can't catch the ball. So that kind of concerns me a little bit, especially, the other thing with wide receivers is they typically don't like to tackle. So we'll see how he works out from that standpoint, because we have some of the best tackling safeties in the league, and that's a big part of what we do. So interested to hear your guys' thoughts on, I like the pick as far as the safety goes. I don't know a whole lot about him, to be dead honest with you guys.
Yeah, I mean, looking at he definitely seems to be the pick that people tend to leave out. I know people like the next pick and especially Red Murdoch. But with Miles Scott, he seems to be kind of the man left out, maybe with the least upside. I really see him as just a depth safety and a special teams guy, which is perfectly fine. I mean, you look at Devin Key, big special teams guy. We love to have him. It just doesn't seem, he's limited athletically. He doesn't have an elite coverage range. And I just think his potential is kind of capped at somewhere. Love him to prove me wrong. Love him to see this and say, I hate Braden. I'm going to go out and go be the starting safety or, one of them. But that, it's just 7th round pick. You never know what you're going to get. So I think he's just kind of limited.
Yeah. Looking at it again, going back to the coaching standpoint of it, some of the stuff around him, he was a 2-time captain, and he was the guy that wore the green dot for the Illini, excuse me. And so from that one, you mentioned, Eric, that he switched over from wide receiver to the defense. We talked a little bit about that, but that was one of the things, is making him see that from the other side, seeing receivers running at him and being able to recognize. And then you've got a guy that is wearing the green dot that's calling the defense for you. There's something in there. There's a leadership role. And I agree with you, Braden. I think that he could be a guy that's a special teams guy. They're looking for more of those leaders that are coming in, that are sitting down. And again, he's another guy, because we do have such good safeties. Again, building that depth, a guy that can take the time, can learn the defense, can learn the nuances of it. But again, you're looking at a guy that can call the defense, and certainly that tells me leadership right off the bat on that.
Yeah, I didn't think about this until Braden and Jim were just talking about it, but you talk about someone who's a leader and a safety and someone who sort of could specialize in special teams. I think of Bruton from the Super Bowl year, the guy who, I mean, they loved to talk about him on the broadcast about how he was like one of the most highly paid special teams guys, and that he earned it because he was so reliable and such a good leader. That, who knows if that's what it could be, but like, there's a lane for that in the NFL. And if you could become that, that's great. I mean, it's special teams, I feel like often gets said, especially during Jim Nantz and Tony Romo, but like it can get overlooked, special teams. And so having people that, you know, can either make a big block for Marvin Mims as he's returning, or, you know, make a good open field tackle, there is a role for that for sure. And I mean, if he's only played safety for 2 or 3 years, you know, he might still be on his way up at the position, you know, who knows. And one of our starting safeties isn't Key. He was an undrafted free agent. So I mean, like, who knows? You never know what these guys are going to become, you know, 1 week removed from the draft. But safety, I felt like it was an area of need, and I'm never mad at a Big Ten defender coming into a defense late who has experience and is talked about as a leader.
Yeah, I agree. The Big Ten was absolutely loaded. You saw it with Ohio State essentially owning the first top 10, essentially all the top 10 picks. Illinois was, I know they didn't, you know, they weren't high up in the Big Ten, but they were a solid defense. And I do, you know, I can't say this too loudly, but I do follow a couple of Big Ten teams. One of them is our neighbor to the east. They dress in red. I won't say their names on the podcast, but they pretty much handled Illinois pretty much handled them the last couple of times that they've played. So I do have some respect for the Illinois defense. So we'll see. I mean, look, 7th round is what it is. That's where you kind of roll the dice and take your shot. So if he turns out, then excellent. If he fades away, then you really didn't lose much on a 7th round pick. The next guy. So Braden, I know you kind of had the eye on the tight end, you know, with Eli leading up to the draft. But what's your thoughts on the Utah tight end? I know he kind of, a lot of people around here seem to like this pick an awful lot. But you know, again, I think we kind of have to pump the brakes a little bit. It is a 7th round pick, so we'll see what we get. But what's your initial thoughts?
Depending on how you feel about Adam Troutman, I think he's a little bit of Adam Troutman 2.0. I think his ceiling isn't very high, maybe a Cameron Brate type tight end. But he's very balanced, reliable depth. I think we'll see maybe some of the tight ends probably be moved to the practice squad, you know, maybe Lucas Kroll. Something like that, because I do think he had Dallin Bentley, you know, has a legitimate shot just from his size and his strength to make this roster. I think the biggest problem with him is that he just doesn't have any standout traits. He's just you see what you get, and he blocks and he can catch a little, and that's kind of it. It's a little underwhelming, but you know, it's probably what you need at that tight end 3 position.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. I think he does. I think there's some, you know, again, you talk about top end speed, or a guy that's gonna figure it out. You know, it would be great to see him come out of something, but I agree with you, Braden. I think that he is just that guy that, you know, we're going to take a flip of the coin, and we're going to see how he works out, see if he fits into one of those areas that we have that can help us out. I agree. I think from everything I've seen, I think he's a practice squad guy, and maybe it's a call up, and maybe it could be like the guy that we got last year that they drafted him, they put him on the practice squad, and we never saw him. And that could be a possibility, for down the road. I don't see him coming in and really competing at that tight end position other than during training camp, and help a person out on the team for sure. But like you, Braden, if he comes up and proves me wrong, hey, let's go, man. Absolutely love it. Challenge those guys all the time.
Of all the scouting reports I read, both for the pre-draft process and then of the people we drafted, he has the best footnote of anybody. It says, this really made me laugh. I read it says a versatile athlete in both phases, and then parentheses can do a standing backflip at 260 pounds. So I mean, that's impressive. I would love to see him get a touchdown and then celebrate by doing a backflip on the field. So he's moved a lot, or he's used as a move blocker a lot. He was projected as a 4th or 5th round guy. We got him in the 7th. It would almost maybe on the pod we should do like a fantasy tight end room and just see who makes the team. Because I mean, like, out of all the tight ends we re-signed, out of these tight ends we've drafted, I've lost count of how many we have. I think we're up to 7 or 8, and it'd be fun to guess how many we keep on the active roster and which ones they are and which ones go to practice squad, because there's a lot of them.
Yeah.
Well, you see,
you
see teams kind of copying the LA Rams with their 3 tight end sets, just heavy running the ball. And we have a bowling ball running back now. We have J.K. Dobbins when he's healthy too. You know what's going to happen? We're going to see probably more 3 tight ends, some 13 formation happen. That's my guess.
Well, we carried a fullback last year too, so and we resigned him, and so just go straight power.
I think that's probably a good guess. I mean, unless they're loading up at tight end to eventually move them all into tackles, I don't know. I don't know what the other route would be, but no, I think you're spot on. So Mr. Irrelevant, it's been a while, I think, since the Broncos have had a Mr. Irrelevant pick. Coach Cobb, I think you called it out a couple of weeks ago. Who was it? Kelly, if I'm not mistaken. He was the Broncos' last
Chad Kelly.
Yeah, Chad Kelly. Yeah.
The guy who lost a fight to a vacuum cleaner attachment.
Yeah.
No.
It's a proud moment for the Kelly family. But we got Red Murdoch, who we all know Zach isn't here, but this was Zach's guy. He absolutely fell in love with his name and his tape. And I know he had a lot of good things to say about him. And Buffalo, the University of Buffalo is not on TV a lot here in the Denver area, so we don't get to watch a whole lot of Buffalo film. But from what I have seen, Coach, I think you called out, potential rookie of the year, but the guy has football in his veins. He's got a nose.
Absolutely.
He's got a nose for the ball, and as a middle linebacker, maybe a tad undersized, but I think that's okay when you pair it with that nose for the ball. I think he led the country in forced fumbles. Just closing speed, high volume tackler. For the numbers that I saw that he put up over the last two years as far as tackle counts, that's impressive. I don't care what college you're doing it at. I know he plays with a chip on his shoulder. That chip probably grows a little bit, I'm going to assume, being Mr. Irrelevant. But give me a little bit more on what your guys' takeaway is on Red Murdoch, more than just the name, because the name is awesome.
Absolutely.
Sorry, my mic was muted. Well, you know how we talked about Jonah Coleman not being a turnover guy? Well, Khalil Red Murdoch is a turnover guy in the positive sense. 17 forced fumbles, an NCAA record. Absolutely high motor. Just watching his tape, it is elite playmaking over and over and over again. Great leadership, great intangibles. You know, I wish we had a guy that was better in coverage. But just that run defense, how do you not take him as Mr. How do you not? It doesn't make sense to pass up on him. I could definitely see him being on specific blitz packages, kind of being comped to Alex Anzalone on the Lions, or I don't know, just a guy that can just make a play when we need it on third down. Third and long would be perfect to put him in.
Yeah, I sit there and look at. I think as you watch the War Room and watching the Paytons, I think they were more excited about this one than they were for some of their other picks. I mean, you just kind of feel from the room, you kind of, wow, we just lucked into a really great person for the for the last pick. The one thing I read on was Murdoch plays firm at the contact point with physicality and toughness. How do you not fall in love with something like that? And to be honest with you, the video that I sat there and watched reminded me, and this is going a little ways back, but it reminded me of Al Wilson. Not a big guy at inside linebacker, but you put up a guy like Tyrone Wheatley from back in the day from Michigan that lead right up the middle. Al Wilson had no problems meeting Tyrone in the middle, and he set the way. You want to try and run up the middle, it's not happening today. It's going to have to go outside. And so you get a guy like that who's not afraid to do those things, who, again, watching the highlight film, oh my God, if we see these things out of the Broncos this season, I'm not expecting him to come in, but, Alex Singleton is getting to that point. There's getting some things that, Alex is starting to run down a little bit. We've got a little old in the tooth in there, and we need some young vitality in there. I think that unless it just completely shocks us in training camp or, something like that happens, I see us talking a lot about him when minicamp comes up. There's no doubt about that.
Yeah, and just to underline Braden's point of his record of 17 forced fumbles, he did that in 3 seasons. And I mean, setting a record is incredible. If you do it in 4 seasons, I'm impressed. You do it in 3, a turnover record, that's something. And he played 2025 through torn ligaments in right ankle and a fracture in his heel. Like, that's a middle linebacker right there. Red Murdoch, someone who plays physically. You draft him Mr. Irrelevant. He's going to play with a chip on his shoulder, plays through injuries, and he forces turnovers. Hard not to be excited about this. And I mean, I brought up Sanders in the pre-draft process, and maybe he was what we were expecting to solve long-term Mike linebacker needs. I would expect Red Murdoch to be ahead of him and be the guy who gets subbed in if anything happens to Shenault or Singleton. And so I'm looking forward to seeing this guy on the field, and I think he's going to light some people up.
Yeah, I think it's fair to say, I mean, who knows, because he played in Buffalo, so we'll pass that to the side. But if Red Murdoch is 3-4 inches taller, which in the grand scheme of things, what's really 3 to 4 inches, maybe a lot in the NFL world, but 3 or 4 inches taller, you're talking about, maybe a first or second round type of pick instead of Mr. Irrelevant, just with the kind of numbers that he put up. So look, anytime you can get that type of talent at the last pick in the draft, I have to imagine, Jim, you said it, the draft room, the war room had to be giddy when they saw his name sitting there. So I'm pretty pumped. Especially, I know Zach is especially pumped to get his guy. So hopefully it is a guy. Fingers crossed. Hopefully it is a guy we're talking about. Come late in the season up for some type of Rookie of the Year award, that would be awesome.
Absolutely. Yep.
There's two other places I want to get to before we wrap up tonight. I know we got about 10 minutes left. Real quickly, how about each one of us just kind of give on the undrafted free agents? Each one of us give maybe your one or two guys that you're excited. We know the Broncos have a rich history of finding those hidden gems, the Chris Harris Juniors of the world that turn into come from an undrafted free agent and become a Pro Bowler. I think did Devin Key is one of those guys, undrafted free agent, now a Pro Bowler on special teams. But give me your guys' quick pick as to who you're excited about from an undrafted free agent standpoint.
Yeah. I just reading up on this guy, Tareen York, the linebacker from Texas A&M. Sorry if I took one of your favorites, but he was ranked in the top 100 players. He was ranked 116. I guess they went to 150 or 200 or however they ranked him, but getting close to a top 100 ranked player in the draft and getting him as a free agent is just incredible. You want to talk about being a cerebral player, especially at the linebacker position. He is just foundationally a smart guy. Just play diagnosis. He has strong instincts on the pass and run coverage. His processing speed is just really, really fast. He's rarely out of position. And one of his limitations is size, but he makes up for it in speed. So he can take on that running back out of the backfield on those pass protections. And he's still physical enough and fast enough to keep up with those tight ends that are more pass catchers. So I love everything about him. He might need to be a little bit better on run defense, being swallowed up by those bigger guards. But I would love to see him make this roster.
Yeah, mine. I'm going wide receiver right along with you, Braden. And it's Colby Katzis out of Lumberjack, out of Northern Arizona. There's a number of games that he was special teams player of the week. He had 6 catches one game for 148 yards and 3 touchdowns against Cal Poly. Certainly a polished team on that. I think it was interesting that the Broncos ended up using on their undrafted free agents, they brought in 4 on top of all the guys we have. And sure, Waddle gets all the pub. Sutton is still Cortland, still does what he does. But after that, receiver doesn't seem completely settled. And I think they're looking for that opportunity. I think Colby Katzis is a guy that has shown flashes at time that he can get out and get some work done and do some good things. And so I'm pretty excited about him coming in this year for sure.
I agree with everything that Braden said about York. I think that one is absolutely huge. Wouldn't it be something that middle linebacker, one of the biggest needs, I felt it was the biggest need coming into the draft, if we end up solving it with York and Red Murdoch, we solve it with a 7th round pick and an undrafted free agent. That would be incredible. But in order to bring up a different name, I like the cornerbacks we brought in. I have a feeling that if one of them shows any promise whatsoever, that they'll make the team. Because I mean, you look at the contract situations of both Riley Moss and the guy that we tendered this offseason, Jaquan McMillan. I have a hard time believing we're going to be re-signing both of them with how much it's going to cost. And so I really expected us to draft a corner higher up. I was really high on Chandler Rivers out of Duke, who ended up going to the Ravens. But the who was it? The Georgia Tech cornerback, Amari Harvey. He was supposed to be drafted in the 6th or 7th round, and we got him as an undrafted free agent too. So, all about the value. It's how you build a roster. And I don't know how you all watched the draft, but on day 3, I was watching the ESPN broadcast, and they put up a statistic that I was completely unaware of. It said NFL players during the 2025 season by round, 13% are from the first round, 24% from the second and third rounds, 63% from the 4th through 7th rounds, and undrafted players. And I mean, that's the majority of where we got our players, and I like all of them.
I did see that stat. That was very interesting to see. I guess it probably makes sense, because there's so many more of them. But for me, I think there were 2 guys, and you could look at I don't get me wrong. I love edge rushers. I love cornerbacks. The long snapper gets no love whatsoever, right? They do one job. That's it. One job. So, the long snapper, Luke Basso out of Oregon, I think, that was a kind of telling snag because, look, does it mean that we're looking for a new long snapper to come in? Or is it just kind of, hey, we have to have somebody for that depth? Anytime you can get a 4-year starter though, as an undrafted free agent, I'm big in that. The other guy that I was kind of, again, kind of same train of thought. When we draft offensive tackles, they typically tend to stay in house. If we can find some offensive tackles as unrestricted free agents, I think that would also be a huge win. And to get the guy Tyler Miller out of Iowa State, we don't see a whole lot of these types of guys come into Denver, because we're much more of that zone blocking scheme. You got to have quick feet, good feet. But when you see a guy 6'9", 335 pounds, that's the kind of guy that when they walk off the bus, the other team says, I don't want to play against that guy, So that's the kind of guy that I was hoping we would be able to get. I do have some friends that go to Iowa State or that went to Iowa State, so they were happy to see us, pick a Cyclone. So I think that was cool for me to see. We did have a comment from Unleashed, looking like questions hidden gems. They have the D2 lineman of the year out of Ferris State, 35 reps on the bench, 5.18 40-yard dash. They need to sign his twin brother too. If we can find guys that can throw up 35 reps, what do they bench at the combine?
225.
225. Yeah,
225.
throw that up 35 times. Well, I'll take those types of guys on my team all day, every day.
Absolutely.
Oh, go ahead, Jim. Go ahead.
No, I was just the thing I was gonna throw in there. We sit there and talk about a lot of these big schools and things like that, and that's what I like about the comment about Ferris State. It's one of those schools that's not big, and going back to linebacker and such, and talking about those hidden gems that we find. There's a guy, John Mobley, played for Kutztown in Pennsylvania. The only other one I've ever heard was wide receiver Andre Reed from Kutztown. They drafted this guy in the 1st round. Small guy, could kick return, punt return, and play linebacker. And ended up being a pretty darn good, Super Bowl 32. We appreciated having him knocking their last pass down. And so I really think it really is taking time, no matter where these guys are. What did they bring to the table? What are they helping us out with, and where are they going? So yeah, with the Hidden Gems comment, we may have one of those from one of those smaller schools too. That'd be really exciting.
Let's hope so. Last thing that I wanted to get to. So I hate doing draft grades, right after the draft. I think it probably takes at least 2 years before you know what you got. I want to open this up more bigger picture in the NFL overall, because I have a good friend. He's an officer up in up in Brighton, I think. And he's a Raiders fan. And we have lots of Raiders fans in Denver, which it never ceases to amaze me. But all I hear about is how great the Raiders draft was. So give me, quick 30 seconds. Who do you think outside of Denver, we're taking them out of this equation, who do you think had the best draft in the entire NFL?
Ooh.
Honestly, to start off, I'd have to go with the Jets. To be honest with you, just from the guys they got together. And I apologize, Braden, if I grabbed yours, but I sat there and looked at those guys. I mean, you're either going to be the best looking team with the best draft class, or again, you're going to be talked about as not having a great one when you get 3 first-round picks. They all look pretty solid, and we all talked about Sadiq. I think we're all, secretly pulling for him that he's going to do some great things for those guys. But that's a team I think I'd have to roll with this year is the Jets.
I agree with you right there. They might have to take a Jets tax, but I like the Eagles, moving up for Mekhi Lemon, especially since, not a big Steelers fan. So watching, why is Philadelphia calling me? It was while he's on the phone with the Steelers is great. The Eli Stowers pick is great. Another team I'd have to say, did a great job. Might also have to take a bad team tax is the Browns. I like what they did in the receiving room. So
I'm going to say the Carolina Panthers. I read about them a fair amount just because I had a stint in North Carolina. And so I track what's happening with them. They're really excited about everything that they got. There was a quote that said, finally, we got a downfield threat for Bryce Young. And they're talking about Chris Brazel II. They got the defensive tackle Lee Hunter. They felt like he was taken. They got to him at a really good value spot. He's somebody who is projected to go to the Broncos to fill that same D tackle spot that we filled in the 3rd round. And then they also got a tackle in Monroe Freeling to protect Bryce Young. And I mean, they were better than most people expected last year. And they seem to be making competent draft picks, which is not something that's always been attributed to the Panthers as a franchise. And so they feel very strongly that their fortunes are starting to change, and that NFC South between the Buccaneers and the Falcons and them, they're filled with a lot of young talent. That's going to be an interesting division in the next few years going forward. The Saints seem to be pretty bad for a little while still, unless Schaff turns out to be something special, but that's why I've been hearing that the Panthers feel like they won the draft from their standpoint.
Yeah. Well, I guess so I agree 100% with the Jets. I think the Jets had a really, really good draft. It's hard to fumble when you have 3 first-rounders, but look, I guess they got there for a reason. They have not been good anytime recently, but everybody in Denver, cover your ears. I think the Chiefs had a really good draft. It bugs me, but I think they're plugging some of those holes, and I would have preferred to see them not plug those holes. But I do think the Chiefs came away with a really good group of guys that they picked.
Yeah, I mean, the Chiefs had a great draft. My one nitpick for them is that they traded a really good cornerback for the 9th pick and then traded up for another cornerback. So from that, maybe they were just trying to get younger and cheaper, but to me, it didn't seem that pick from 9 to 6 didn't seem to be a necessary trade, in my opinion. I mean, I don't know. It just seemed like a lateral move.
Yep.
But
I could take
cornerback
that
in the draft. Yeah.
Yeah.
Best cornerback in the draft. Great player. It just seemed a little lateral.
Yeah. I'm right there with you. Look, I hope they stink. I don't want them to be good. So let's all cross our fingers. Well, appreciate everybody for jumping on tonight for the questions. Remember to on all your you can follow us on all your different socials. Like, follow, comment, everything that goes along with that. But we will get back at you guys next Monday. Same time, same place. Until then, go Broncos.
Go Broncos.
Go Broncos.
Go Broncos.